Act 4, Recent Studies. In this final section, I want to summarize a few of the new directions that we've seen in Book of Mormon scholarship in the last 5 or 6 years, at least at the time of this recording. The old questions have not been completely settled, and I expect we will continue to litigate these for a long time. But there are new approaches to these questions, and more entirely new questions as well. I want to start out with a sermon by Jared Hickman, Learning to Read with the Book of Mormon. We haven't covered sermons here in this podcast, though there are many excellent ones on the Book of Mormon, but this is one exception that I need to make. Jared Hickman published in 2014 one of the most consequential, if not the most consequential article on the Book of Mormon as Amerindian Apocalypse in the journal American Literature. This article challenged the traditional reading of racism in the Book of Mormon, showing how it deconstructs itself. This approach blew people away and remained hugely influential for rereading the Book of Mormon. This sermon is really a deep analysis of reading itself. It's gorgeous from one of the great scholars of our day. In 2017, another amazing scholar of American religion, Colleen McDaniel, makes a key contribution: Mexicans, Tourism, and the Book of Mormon Geography. McDaniel brings a material culture lens to tourism as an industry that sprung up from the apologetic approaches to the Book of Mormon. How has the Book of Mormon shaped the real world and people's lived experiences? This article is so innovative. It tells a whole new story of how the Book of Mormon geography got debated from the early 20th century up until today. It's a hugely important history of this particular sub-question in Book of Mormon studies. You'll also meet some key figures in Mexico who are part of this industry. I love this article and highly recommend it. We see a collection of important articles in the summer 2019 issue that all deal with the Book of Mormon, the first issue in a long time to publish so many articles on the Book of Mormon at once. First up is Brian Hales, Automatic Writing and the Book of Mormon, an update. Here, Hales examines one of the newer theories for the production of the Book of Mormon among naturalists, who argued that Smith wrote while in a trance or automatically. There are several examples of this kind of unconscious writing, and Hales examines these as a comparison. Most important here is a 1915 book written with a medium called The Sorry Tale. There are others as well, but Hales argues that there are too many dissimilarities to classify the book in this way. Next up is Ryan Thomas, The Gold Plates and Ancient Metal Epigraphy. This article is the definitive study of writing on metal plates in antiquity. It looks at all the examples. This is part of a larger trend to study the question of the gold plates. Richard Bushman, Ann Taves, and others have puzzled over the gold plates. What Ryan Thomas does is establishing whether or not there were any ancient precedents for something like the brass plates or the gold plates, metal codices of the kind described in the book. The descriptions in the Book of Mormon diverge from all known examples. An online-only appendix goes into even more detail. In the next article, Larry Morris's Empirical Witnesses of the Gold Plates offers more discussion of the various witnesses to the gold plates among Joseph Smith's contemporaries. Rebecca Riesler wrote Plain and Precious Things Lost, the Small Plates of Nephi, as the last contribution to that special 2019 issue. This is a study of the role that the small plates of Nephi play in the narrative of the Book of Mormon itself. It was called a plain and precious book. This is actually a really big issue in apologetic and naturalistic approaches. Quinn Brewster's article from 1996 offers some discussion of this. Riesler offers another perspective that, quote, sometime in the generations before Alma, the small plates of Nephi and the teaching thereon are lost or obscured from view. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's worth mentioning that Becky is one of the only women who has published on the Book of Mormon in dialogue, Colleen McDaniel being the exception just a few years before her. Recent years have seen a big influx of women scholars into this subfield, but not as many have been publishing in dialogue, and I hope that we see that change. Speaking of this, I want to highlight the joint sermon in this issue by Fatima Saleh and Margaret Olson Hemming, Wrestling with the Racism of the Book of Mormon. Again, we haven't covered sermons, but this one is also outstanding. These two are the authors of a really important book, The Book of Mormon for the Least of These. Volume 1 came out a few years ago, and they're finishing up Volume 2 now. It takes a social justice approach to the Book of Mormon, and this sermon is a really beautiful discussion of the problem of race here. The most recent article that we've published is by William Davis. Davis's 2020 book, Visions of a Seer Stone, was a finalist for the American Academy of Religion Book Awards. It's a huge deal. Anyway, his winter 2020 article is called The Limits of Naturalistic Criteria for the Book of Mormon, comparing Joseph Smith and Andrew Jackson Davis. This takes his book's research in a new direction. Here, he looks at the claims that Joseph Smith could not have produced the Book of Mormon and brings new data to this long-standing question. He looks specifically at Andrew Jackson Davis, an American seer who wrote the book The Principles of Nature in 1847 while in a trance. In this comparison, he writes, we find another complex text produced by a speaker with limited formal education and training, created under similar conditions and circumstances, and a work that stands as its young creator's greatest masterpiece, even though the text was created at the dawn of the speaker's career. This is sure to make a long-standing contribution to the discussion. Okay, so we conclude the most recent period with a bit of analysis. There is so much more to say about the Book of Mormon. We're still seeing some of the classic questions on historicity come up. But even here, there is so much more innovation about ancient and modern cultures, new theories of automatic writing that are being debated, and more. But we are also seeing new approaches altogether, new areas of research on the gold plates, on the structure of the Book of Mormon, and new innovations on the reception of the book, including tourism, which show a lot of promise. Now, I normally don't do this, but I just want to let you all in on the fact that 2 new articles on the Book of Mormon are going to be dropping soon. One in fall and another in winter 2021. Michael McKay, a brilliant scholar in BYU's Religious Education Department, has a fascinating article on Joseph Smith's translation methods. This article breaks new ground theoretically and some amazing new observations about the early documents that Smith was working with. No spoilers, but it is so good. The winter 2021 issue has a great article by Grant Adamson, Joseph Smith, Thomas Paine, and Matthew 27. This article pursues a really interesting hypothesis that the Book of Mormon is responding directly to skeptics of the Bible, like Thomas Paine, by proposing solutions to the problems that they had raised about specific passages. This one looks at controversies over Matthew's unique discussion of events surrounding Jesus' resurrection. Keep an eye out for this one as well. Wow, this has been such a fun episode to do, and there is definitely more to come. Thank you for taking this journey with me and for taking the journey through Dialogue Journal, and for all of your support. If you want to subscribe or donate to Dialogue, you can do so at dialoguejournal.com/subscribe. This episode was written by me, with editing and music by Daniel Foster Smith. Our content manager is Emily Jensen. Our social media manager is Adam McLean. The Dialogue Journal podcast is produced by the Dialogue Foundation, a registered 501c3, with support from Mary Thebes. This show is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, a collective of independent, interesting podcasts who promote thoughtful, respectful, and engaging inquiry and discussion of all aspects of the LDS tradition, thought, and arts and culture. And we've been growing like wildfire with tons of new shows like Fireside with Blair Hodges, At Last She Said It, Bristlecone Firesides, Strangers No More, Funeral Potatoes at the Singles Ward, and more. Check out all the shows at dialoguejournal.com/podcast network. That's dialoguejournal.com/podcast network.